Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. With me today is Qiana Mickie, a New York City-based food systems leader and speaker that uses food as a driver of enterprise, innovation, and equity. Qiana, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Oh, thank you for having me. Hi, everybody.
So let's start with something because I've never really heard food systems leader before. So what is that?
Oh, good question. Food systems is essentially like a term that kind of describes just the ecosystem that really gets food from the fields to folks' plate and everything in between. So, my work has really been around learning about the systems that exist, learning that there are different systems in our food system. So, not just say logistics and distribution and storage and production and harvest, but that there's also like an industrial agriculture food system, which is different than our regional food system or a hyper local food system. And how do those interplay and intersect? So it's been really about my work is understanding those systems to really help inform how to make changes that could really help either the farmers or the consumers or both, how to inform policy so that it can be either be more efficient or more values based.
Got it. So is that part of your work then? As I see you've established the Office of Urban Agriculture to advance urban agriculture, environmental justice, and food policy in New York City. Is that sort of how it all ties in for you?
Oh, it absolutely it does. So, yes, for years I worked in food systems, working with farmers, government officials, businesses, for profit and nonprofit, and that really kind of helped me understand the systems in our natural and built environments and urban agriculture, and how urban agriculture can be up, or well, it is a part, but how it can be more, especially in urban cities. Oftentimes, when people think of New York City, they don't think of fruit trees, they don't think of culturally relevant food growing, or even like urban farms like you see in my background. But in fact, this is a New York City, like a lot of cities, have a long rich history of agriculture. And now for an office of urban agriculture, it's really to think about how can we support as a city, the vision, tapping into the potential, but increasing environmental equity, racial equity, and economic equity through innovative and nature-based solutions and urban agriculture. So yes, urban agriculture is a big part of our food system. And while urban agriculture will probably never feed the full city of New York, it is a critical part from consumers to producers to farmers and growers on how urban agriculture can support and be a part of our food system, and also what are the linkages to our rural and peri-urban food system. So our larger farmers, how do we support our watershed? How do we support our soils? So food that's being grown in our area and in our region is healthy for the land, healthy for folks, but it's also getting down to the folks who need it, which is all of us, but also thinking about how to make it more accessible and affordable to those that it might not be.
So, Kiana, I think
Yeah.
we have to double click here a bit. So I'm one of these people I'm having a hard time when it comes to New York City and especially Manhattan. And I've been there, I live very close. I've been there dozens and dozens of times. I'm trying to understand in a city that is, look, there's large buildings and then there's a lot of walk-ups, whether you go to the southern end or north of 60 or 70. Where exactly do you start urban agriculture? Where do you grow things in that environment?
Oh, it's a great question. When it comes to urban agriculture in New York City and other urban cities, you really think about growing from the ground up. You can also think about growing from rooftops, on rooftops and down, but you can also think about growing indoors as well. So we're fortunate to have unique and innovative models that are not just maybe historically, culturally driven, or support like native based like plants and herbs, but there's also the opportunity to experiment or to grow and to scale indoors, when then you're able to control more of the environment that the food or the non-edible products are being grown. So to me in New York City, I hope that folks continue to understand that you can grow in community gardens as small as pocket gardens like in the backyards of a building, but you can also grow on rooftops with cover and without cover. There's also ways that you can grow indoors. In fact, there's folks that are even growing mushrooms in things like containers and even fridges, like retrofitting old refrigerators to be like a nice place and a suitable place to grow mushrooms. So it really is it's about being innovative and creative, but that doesn't necessarily mean just tech. So oftentimes people think of just hydroponics as a way to grow and thinking of feeding the future, but we also need to know and find ways to bring in our resilient practices from many of our cultures, and that can happen here too. So a greenhouse like the one you see in my background or hoop house can help grow things that you wouldn't think could grow in the South Bronx, like sorrel and turmeric, and and experiment with other plants. So because we also live in different microclimates, right? Or folks come from different microclimates. So you can bring seeds and we can bring plants and really think about how can we adjust our controlled environments to create that. But oftentimes people aren't even familiar with what grows well here in our current microclimates, even with climate change. So this creates this unique opportunity to think about our seasons in a different way and how we can grow.
So one of the things I'm hearing possibly is, I mean, with the high cost of food, I know we can't grow a balanced diet indoors, but there might be what can we? So I'm living in a 600 square foot
Mm-hmm.
walk up. What can I possibly grow on the windowsill, etc.?
Oh yeah. Well, when you think about your windowsill, it's always important to think about, right, your access to sunlight, your access to, the containers that you're using. So for that, that could be everything that people use every day, like herbs. It can also be depending on your access to sun, even things like tomatoes. So things that food that we use in our daily lives or we want to grow and want to eat, we can do that. Now, of course, if you're doing it on a windowsill, your scale is going to probably be just for you and your
Mhm.
family. However, when we think about opening, growing indoors, we can also create other opportunities to grow other things, maybe things that need a little bit of a warmer climate or situation. So again, it gives you the opportunity to kind of experiment with scale, with environment, and what you're able to handle yourself. So when it comes to thinking about bringing that larger into New York City, that is kind of the breadth of urban agriculture or the models that we're trying to support, is how to support everyone on where they're at scale, where they're at with what they want to grow, and how to make that possible from windowsill to rooftop. One of the things that I've been looking into that I find really fascinating is I think it's important to not just address, say, food insecurity or housing. New Yorkers in New York City, we're facing multiple disparities, health, wealth, environmental disparities. So we really need our solutions to have co-benefits and really kind of do double, if not triple the work. One of the research and avenues that I'm looking into is agrivoltaics, which is the model of co-location of agriculture and solar adoption and production. So to me, it's increasing that, but even thinking, what are some of our underutilized spaces in the city, which we still have in some different ways? One of those is being rooftops. How can we potentially address and go up and grow, maybe not just agriculture to keep a roof cool, but are we pushing ourselves to think about agriculture for food production? So that's something that I'm really fascinated in looking into and bringing that to a city so that can be feasible, replicable, no matter if you have an industrial rooftop, which we've seen already where a lot of businesses have done and have leafy greens.
Hmm.
We think of folks like Brooklyn Grange in the city or Gotham Greens, which is spawned, throughout the country. But when, going back to what you were saying, if people can do that on a realistic scale or a more feasible scale, I'm thinking about average size in New York rooftops. Can we do a little bit more of that, that we're addressing food production while, and creating solar energy, but that would also create the opportunity for stormwater mitigation and community engagement. So we can really define the opportunities of jobs, the opportunities of education while addressing capital needs. So it can be
Mhm.
housing and food, because you could have a building, a walk up, a high rise, something in between where the rooftop is maybe doing double the work.
I think that's great. And I mean, look, there's a lot of benefits you mentioned, but just straight up food insecurity, and skyrocketing prices that we've had globally.
Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful outlet or opportunity there.
Yes, absolutely. Oftentimes we're going to continue to see, unfortunately, in an era of climate chaos, and climate disruptions, we're going to see the changes or inputs that impact our existing food systems in these different and hard, sudden ways. We think about the pandemic and how to impact food insecurity for a lot more folks that typically didn't think of themselves as food insecure. But in fact, one of the statistics that I've heard from Robert Hood Foundation, or what I've read, is their poverty tracker. They have quoted around approximately 40% of families in New York with children face some form of food insecurity.
Hmm.
So there is some types of imbalance and disruptions that most New Yorkers and most other folks are facing. And again, I think for urban agriculture, it is our opportunity, our duty, if you will, to think about a food system that can grow food hyper locally, also create healthier environments right where people are living. So there is an addition or an option where food can be accessed quickly, more affordably, and have options and balance. So if there are disruptions in our food systems, like going to the grocery store or the farmers markets, that you still have options in our community that are very resilient.
No, I think that's wonderful. And because it's so close to people, you might even come up with, say, a 10% share to people in the neighborhood that that might be food and shelter insecure. So
Yeah.
anyway, lots of opportunities there. Um, Ken, about a month ago, you sat on a panel with a friend of the show and a friend of our events, Kim Macharia. So tell us a bit about the panel and some of the learnings in the conversation.
Oh yeah, it was so great to meet her. That was my first time meeting her. It was a panel around Climate Week and climate work. So we really got a chance to talk about the different facets, again, of our urban agriculture systems, but
Mhm.
also how can we in our work support the grant opportunities, so economic development opportunities, research opportunities, data and reporting opportunities of our land stewards. So if they're growers, urban growers, rural growers, farmers, producers, we were talking kind of the breadth of, and especially what Kim was bringing, given her information around working with the SARE grants at USDA. It was really helpful to kind of think about not just the models that exist in the city that people are doing already to, say, grow food or mitigate climate crisis and stormwater, but are there research and opportunities that those folks can access to make that more accessible? So
Mhm.
to me, it's always thinking about, and what was helpful to learn from her and some of the lessons that we're learning is, again, some folks are not as familiar with what they're able to do in their communities right now around food insecurity or urban agriculture, or even the different innovations of urban agriculture. So oftentimes, and what came up on the panel is folks asking us, like, how can I get in? I'm interested. Maybe I want to be a hydroponic farmer. Or there was somebody who was like, I work in Queens. How can I grow food on my windowsill in or my community? So we were really kind of talking about what are the different options that we know already or models, but I think it's also important to say, how can you connect? So I think urban agriculture and conversations like this give the opportunity for folks to see how they are climate stewards themselves and how they are a part and can be a part of solutions that are feasible. Oftentimes, when we hear climate or climate justice, we think very scientific or high level or even academic. And what I think is important is from students to young adults that they feel that they have a knowledge and a power and a community that they can learn from and become a part of, so they can make their home, their apartment, their studio, their school a growing and healthy environment. And the realities are, how do we get money to do those kind of things? How do our, government systems support that? And that was something that Kim was really able to kind of share with us, is all these different unique grants at different scales that can support nonprofits, for profits, and just get them technical resources. Because that's really, between funding and technical assistance, is really how that learning really goes. And again, how we all can be climate stewards to change our future for the better.
And let's talk a little bit about food waste and its
Mhm.
contribution to food insecurity. I mean, in cities especially, yeah, I know it, it takes an hour to drive a block and a minute to walk a block in New York and many parts of the day. But the reality is that there's a lot of, we call it food waste, but frankly, edible, usable
Yes.
food waste at the end of the day from restaurants or stores. I mean, how do we translate what is still usable to the individuals who need it?
Yes, I think this is a question we're going to continue to tackle, since food and hunger still are persistent issues in our communities. One of the things that I think is important and what is often familiar to folks are food or models that address food insecurity by trying to divert edible food into getting it into the hands or organizations that can disseminate it to community members. So getting edible food before it spoils to the hands of folks who are either able to eat it as is or create new meals from that. And so we have those kind of models in our food emergency systems. And I think getting more fresh food into those environments will also be helpful in addressing food insecurity. But I think one of the things that is important too is thinking that food waste, sometimes there are models that the end consumer, the folks that are most impacted, the most food insecure, are still seen as folks to get food at the end of its life cycle. So
Hmm.
the nutrients is less, where it's more likely to spoil, and there's less time to really use it or access it. I think other ways that we can continue to support or address food waste is, like you said, are there ways that we can think about food that is being grown? So not just by time it gets, say, packaged and into
Right.
a retail shop or a restaurant, is there food that we're actually thinking with a cultural relevant lens, a lens to seasonality and sustainability, that, say, for instance, like sweet potato is a really great example. Can we think about a sweet potato, not just in the ways that we might be familiar with our own cultural food ways and patterns, but if we open it up to other cultural relevant points, say like communities in the Caribbean, they see the whole vegetable from leaf to tuber as an opportunity. So to me, it's also finding ways that we can support models in harvesting and growing and education, and also even things like culinary, where we're actually taking food that's grown. If we're thinking about weeds like sweet potato leaves, you think you chop them off, or carrot leaves or beet leaves, and you chop them off and you throw it in compost. Compost is great, but what about if that is another way and another nutrient dense food source? How do you use it to create another meal, another option? And so now you're using the whole vegetable, the whole produce. So to me, that's another way that we can really think about addressing food waste, is how do we support hyper local, culturally relevant urban agriculture growing, production that's scaled to folks that need it the most, folks that are able to do it. How do they get trained to do it? How do they have access to chopping, serving, cutting, freezing. But again, that cultural relevancy around how do I look at the food that I'm growing so it's not just a weed, it's actually food that is nutrient dense and we can eat it, cook it in different ways. Now you've cut down on food waste in all these different ways that we oftentimes don't see. And I think having multiple solutions and options at our hands makes it a lot easier to think about food waste in a different way. The other things too is if we do get to using food waste, so let's say it gets to our compost or it gets to another bin, I've been seeing, and I'd love to continue to explore in the city how there are designers, fabric designers, clothing folks that are not just recycling scraps, but they're actually using food to dye products or create new materials that we're able to use. Even things like hemp. We don't have hemp yet in the city, but thinking about not just say certain products in the ways that we use it, like growing or for oils, that these can actually be used to remediate soil, like hemp can be used to grow to remediate soil. Then that soil's healthy, so we could use it again, another source potentially for food production. But also hemp could be manufactured into other products that we need, concrete, blocks, food, clothing, or infused into food, but clothing. And I think these are some of the ways that we have to support addressing food waste, is thinking innovatively, creatively. But again, I think it really always kind of comes back to community and finding ways to give them the sources to be the business owners, to be the ones to create the solutions to help inform policy, so we can see how that can support a larger neighborhood, community, city, and state.
Qiana, I really like that. You know what? I didn't think a lot about the whole vegetable, if you will, and how to use it. And I think that that's one of those things that is so simple,
Yeah.
but that we will overlook because we just don't understand. As you said, we know, or we're taught to know, to chop off the green from the carrot. Um, how do you get something that simple out to the public so that they are getting everything they can out of their food?
That is a great question. I think for me, in my role in working in the field, as well as the field of food systems, and then also working at the city, to me, it's really thinking about how to support either existing projects and partners that are doing that work. But I think we also have to think about the systems, and like even as a city, how do we scale these projects? How do we scale these opportunities so there are more people becoming a part of the city's success and fabric? So I think it's really thinking also, how do we create projects and initiatives and pilots where the city is demonstrating its leadership on support or leveraging its assets like underutilized land in order to create these spaces for those micro hubs to have a place to process the food, to underutilized land, again, rooftops, indoors to soil, to actually have a place to grow and harvest. Education. I think thinking about education from students, one of the things that we've been doing is reimagining what is climate and agriculture education in connection to public school students. How do we get those lessons learned? So to me, it's not just being able to see it, it's being able to touch it and learn it from the folks that are doing it already. We have a lot of great New Yorkers and practitioners, from growers to producers to small business owners, that have this wealth of knowledge. So to me, it's building procurement opportunities and contracts and identifying land that could then be used to support models as such. So there's more opportunities to make it happen, and then creating a place where people have now the demand to use it. So I think it's also finding ways to support the systems where it's, whether it's retail or wholesale or it's just going direct to consumer, that we create feasible models that people are able to build and drive themselves, and that we as a city are supporting that. We can't only look at the biggest players and the biggest capital projects. We really need feasible solutions at small to mid scale that really bring in our working New Yorkers, our small businesses, our students. So to me, those are really some of the practical ways that I've been looking at our work on how to inform priorities that the city already has to incorporate nature and innovative solutions that bring in more of our New Yorkers, including the most impacted, into those active work. Can they be ones that get those contracts? Are they able to become teachers, get paid to do it? Are we creating more workforce opportunities so there's more folks being trained and going right back into the community? So now they're teaching other folks, but now we're seeing our spaces go greener, cleaner, more efficient, and more tech savvy, more innovative as well.
So are these the type, like we've talked about quite a bit now, are these the type of things that through your business, QJM Multiprise, that you help cities or communities, get better at?
Yes, that's a great question. So, when I'm not
What do you do?
what do I do? So when I'm not wearing my day hat, my day job hat, I do have a consultancy called QJM Multiprise. And yes, I would say it is, I offer from community leaders to government officials to business leaders when I'm on my own time to now to think about and being innovative about how to meet mission and budget, and how do we incorporate these kind of systems. So for some organizations, they're struggling with how to authentically engage, say, certain target clients or communities, or even get to folks to understand that they want to have equity driven measures, but they don't know how to make that, say, meet a bottom line. So oftentimes businesses talk about triple bottom line. I think it's even going higher. So I really think it's about what is your true mission? How do you, so I help businesses, and whether through services like programming, where we're just talking through terms and systems and getting folks to understand and how to incorporate that into their work. I also do some leadership coaching as well. So there are an opportunity. I'm a former nonprofit leader myself. I've had to start a nonprofit or take a nonprofit from the red to the black. So I also offer leadership coaching for leaders, whether they're board members or EDs, to really think about this genuine way that you can actually meet your operational goals, but there are ways to do that it can still be equity driven and mission driven. And here are some of the tools. So we build tools and resources to make that happen. So when people say that they want to like support their community as well as like, make money, we find ways to do that. Now, oftentimes I've done that in the scope of like food work and food systems work, or even policy, because that's the other thing too, is sometimes it's not just the work you're doing in your organization. Sometimes we need our policy to kind of understand and support us in those ways. So going back to grants, but it's also just lawmaking and legislative. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's taking the lessons from the ground up, from the communities up, from the nonprofits, from the for-profits, and using that information to kind of help inform what policy could look like. And again, encouraging them to build their own advocacy around it.
Sounds like you're an igniter, Qiana.
I like to think so. I like igniter, change maker, igniter. Oftentimes people hear things like equity or change, and it sounds very visionary. And I think there are elements that where you need to know what you're building towards and vision, but you also have to be able to manifest it. And I think that that's something that sometimes people struggle with, is kind of getting out of our usual approaches and models and systems and thinking about, well, if I don't do that, what are the alternative systems? How do I gain or build a new demand or a new supply? Or how do I, if my strengths are something that come from growing or production or education, how can I really monetize that, but still be good to the land and good to my community? So to me, I think there's a way to build vision into what we're saying around change making,
Right.
but there has to be feasible, pragmatic ways to make it happen, and how to be able to be solvent, right? We need to be
Yep.
sustainable. So that, yes,
Totally.
I'm here, and I like to try to work with folks in my different hats and capacities on really trying to manifest to implement your visions. And I want people to continue to feel like the future is, we need change in the future, but there is every role that we can play, from an individual to community to structural. Change only starts with that one igniter and how you build that collective work. There's different ways to do it. The more you know, the more you can engage, the more you can be a change maker too. It's possible, is what I'm saying.
It's definitely possible. We've been talking with Qiana Mickie, New York City-based food systems leader. Qiana, it's amazing how quickly the time goes by, but I want to ask you, I want to fit in one last question. Um, and those of you in New York City have the benefit of the United Nations there, and it looks like you've done some work with them. The International Council of Urgency,
Mhm.
Coordination Committee of the Civil Society Mechanism. Just tell us a little bit about that. And I mean, look, taking all the good things you've done and obviously making them global in some way.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can't have local change without thinking globally, right? You're thinking global, acting local. So those mechanisms and tables really gave me the chance, really put a lot of what I'm talking about to grow and learn from each other. So civil society is really other stakeholders, grassroots groups, policymakers, growers, producers, fisher folks, on, again, thinking about the nature-based or innovative solutions, policy changes that they know, that are familiar to their neck of the woods, if you will. If your neck of the woods is Nigeria, if your neck of the woods is Detroit, if your neck of the woods is Spain. And so basically what we do is come together to really understand what is the commonality of the issues that we're all facing. What are the disparities around economics,
Mm.
disparities around our food system, some of the climate impacts around our agriculture systems. So it's helpful to hear from other folks what they're doing to sustain their food systems and their communities and their practices, but also how we can work together to learn from each other to inform policy. So international policy, federal policy, and then how do we bring that back right home to our local policies? So it's been really great to have these convenings where we're able to interface with governmental offices and agencies who are working on our food systems, from food to ag to climate to economic development, and really be there as a champion to advocate what we've heard and seen on the ground in ways to inform and negotiate, or inform policy, and how to find that compromise and that balance. So it's going not just from the most impacted, but how do we infuse that to change policy at at a level that will have more impact at the global level. So then there are times when we meet globally to have those conversations, again, to learn. And it's great to have the tables where global leaders are now listening. So that's also the governmental leaders. They need to know and hear from different stakeholders, and it's just a way to leverage collective power.
Qiana Mickie, once again, it's been a pleasure, and I got to tell you, I mean, talking from global to local, and local being the individual and how you can help them to support or learn to support or fight against their own food insecurity on an individual or family basis. I think, wow, your work is so important, and I'm so glad you had the chance to come in and chat with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And yes, I know I can say a lot in a little bit amount of time, but I'm really glad to have the chance to speak to new folks that I may have not met before.
Thank you.
Thank you.